The galaxy had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, each one clawing for dominance, making its mark on the universe, only to be forgotten in time. Among the stars, the ancient species of the Eurasians, the towering Xantar, and the enigmatic Erythians were considered the masters of the cosmos. Their advanced technologies, immense fleets, and centuries of warfare had earned them a position as the galactic elite. They ruled without challenge, imposing their will across planets and star systems. But there was one species that stood on the fringe of the galaxy, unknown to many and considered insignificant by the galactic powers. Humanity. Earth, a small blue and green planet nestled in the Sol system, was home to a species that had yet to join the interstellar stage, unaware that the universe had already made its judgment about them, weak, primitive, and beneath notice. That all changed when the first alien ship crashed into Earth's atmosphere. It was not a graceful landing, but a catastrophic crash. The craft, clearly of alien design, plummeted toward Earth with a trail of fiery debris. It impacted near a remote desert outpost, causing a seismic shockwave felt across the continent. The government scrambled to contain the situation, sending military forces and scientists to investigate. What they found was a wreckage unlike anything seen before: sleek metallic alloys, strange symbols, and most importantly, a small crew of aliens, wounded but alive. These aliens, later identified as the Zolaks, were a warrior race, feared across the galaxy. Their mission had been one of reconnaissance, an effort to determine the potential of humanity as a future threat. But something had gone terribly wrong. The ship's engines had failed, sending them spiraling into Earth's atmosphere. At first, the humans were cautious, unsure whether these visitors were hostile or simply stranded. But their technology was far beyond anything humanity had achieved. The humans, not yet equipped to understand their language or customs, attempted to communicate. Surprisingly, the Zolaks didn't retaliate or view humans as a threat, they were simply stranded. The first encounter marked the beginning of a long, complicated relationship. In exchange for the humans' help in repairing their ship, the Zolaks shared some of their advanced technology. But they made a grave mistake: they underestimated humanity's drive. The Zolaks had believed that their technology, so advanced in comparison to anything on Earth, would make humans subservient. But the humans weren't like the other species they had encountered. There was something different about them, something more than their willingness to adapt. Humanity had an innate resilience, an ability to learn and grow faster than any other species the Zolaks had ever met. This would be their first lesson in the underdog nature of humanity. As the Zolaks' ship was repaired, humans quickly began to reverse-engineer the alien technology, replicating it at a pace that startled their guests. A few months later, the Zolaks were forced to leave, but they did so with a deep, unexpected respect for the humans they had initially considered primitive. It was then that the first human explorers were launched into space, equipped with alien technology. Their ships, though crude compared to the ancient empires of the galaxy, carried the same advanced engines that had once powered the Zolaks' warships. These explorers had no grand fleets or vast armadas, but they had something more: the courage to stand on the edge of the unknown, a drive that no other species seemed to have. The first humans who ventured into deep space were greeted with surprise and curiosity, but also apprehension. Other species had seen the rise and fall of countless empires, and they knew that humanity was still too young, too inexperienced to challenge the established order. They were ignored, left to wander the outer edges of known space. But humanity wasn't deterred. The first few years were difficult. They faced hostile alien species, hostile environments, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. But humanity adapted, and over time, their numbers grew. Small colonies were established on distant planets, and slowly, humanity began to carve out a foothold in the galaxy. It was not long before they encountered the first of the galactic powers, the Eurasians. The Eurasians had ruled their corner of the galaxy for millennia, and they viewed humanity's attempts to explore their territory as a direct challenge. They responded with their military might, intending to push humanity back to Earth. But humanity had learned quickly. The Eurasians underestimated the resolve of the humans, their willingness to fight and innovate. The humans didn't have the firepower of the Eurasians, but they had something far more dangerous: ingenuity. And soon, they began to win skirmish after skirmish, their tactics becoming legendary across the galaxy. The victories against the Eurasians were small but significant, and their impact rippled through the galaxy. The humans' unexpected resilience began to stir something deep within the hearts of the galactic empires. The Eurasians, once invincible, had been pushed back by a race they had initially deemed too insignificant to notice. The news spread quickly, igniting whispers of a new force emerging on the galactic stage, a force that could challenge the long-established order. In the wake of these victories, the Zolaks returned to the galaxy's wider stage, and this time, they did not underestimate humanity. Their warriors, known for their brutal efficiency, were reformed in the aftermath of their encounters with the humans. They began to train their soldiers specifically with humans in mind, incorporating what they had learned in their brief stay on Earth. Yet, in their arrogance, they believed humanity could be controlled with force, a mistake that would prove fatal. Despite the growing tensions, the galaxy's powers remained largely indifferent, at least initially. The Xantar, the towering and fearsome giants of the galaxy, were more focused on their expansion, while the Erythians, with their cold logic, dismissed humanity as an irrelevant threat. The rest of the galaxy continued their endless wars and territorial expansions, still oblivious to the growing fire that burned in humanity's heart. However, the first truly galaxy-shaking event came not from military might, but from an act of rebellion. It began with a single colony, a small human settlement on the distant moon of Lysara, in the frontier system of the Eurasians. The colony had been a peaceful one, relying on the trade of resources to survive, content to remain out of the conflicts that embroiled the greater galaxy. But as the Eurasian forces continued to tighten their grip on the area, demanding tribute and threatening to dismantle the colony, something inside the humans broke. They could no longer remain passive. A group of rebels, led by a charismatic and fearless woman named Alara Quinn, took up arms against their oppressors. What began as a small skirmish soon ignited into a full-scale uprising. The Eurasian garrisons were ill-prepared for the guerrilla tactics employed by the humans. They had never faced a resistance like this, unpredictable, relentless, and using every trick in the book to inflict damage. Human ingenuity, honed through years of survival, had transformed their fighters into a well-organized, highly effective force. The rebellion on Lysara soon spread to other colonies. Each human settlement had its own grudge against the galactic empires that had taken so much and given so little. As the fires of resistance spread, more and more humans began to take up arms, not only against the Eurasians, but against all the powerful galactic factions that sought to oppress them. Meanwhile, the Zolaks, observing from afar, began to realize that humanity's rebellion wasn't merely an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern. Humanity had begun to organize, to unite under a banner of defiance. The humans were no longer the weak, primitive species they had once thought them to be, they were becoming something more. And in the depths of the galaxy's empires, a growing fear took root. The underdogs had found their voice, and they were no longer willing to be silenced. The war for the galaxy was no longer a question of who had the most advanced technology or the largest fleet. It was now a battle for the heart and soul of the universe itself. The galaxy's most powerful empires had been lulled into a false sense of security, believing their domination was unshakable. But as humanity rose, it became clear that this underdog species had the will and the skill to topple the mightiest of empires. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for freedom. On the moon of Lysara, the rebellion reached its peak. Alara Quinn, now a symbol of human resistance, stood before the shattered remnants of a Eurasian warship, its massive frame looming like a monument to the galaxy's arrogance. She addressed her followers, her voice strong and resolute, rallying them for what was to come. The galaxy may have forgotten us, but we will make them remember, Alara declared. The empires may have tried to break us, but we will rise stronger than ever before. Humanity is not just a footnote in the galaxy's history, we are the future. And this is only the beginning. With those words, the rebellion was no longer just a series of isolated uprisings. It had become a movement, a unified force that was challenging the entire galactic order. The spark of rebellion had been lit, and humanity's flame was only growing brighter. The galaxy's most powerful forces were now on notice, the underdogs had risen, and they were coming for everything. The uprising on Lysara was just the beginning, but it sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Erosians, once so certain of their dominance, now found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't easily crush. Humanity's resistance was spreading like wildfire, a force fueled by not just the desire to survive, but by an unbreakable will to win. Across the galaxy, humans were taking up arms, organizing fleets, and disrupting trade routes. A united front, built on a shared belief that the galaxy's powers could no longer be trusted, was beginning to form. It was clear that the galaxy's empires were underestimating humanity's potential. They had been distracted by their internal struggles, consumed by territorial wars and the pursuit of greater power. The Zalax, who had once seen humanity as a curiosity, were now observing with growing concern. They had underestimated the humans once before, and they were determined not to make the same mistake again. The first truly pivotal clash occurred on the fringe planet of Garros, a world once claimed by the Erythians. The planet had been the site of a major resource deposit, a rare element needed for the construction of advanced warships. The Erythians had long controlled the planet, using its resources to fuel their fleets, but they had overlooked the growing human presence on its moon, where a group of settlers had begun to forge their own path. The humans on Garros had formed a resistance force, initially small, but with each passing day their numbers grew. They had the element of surprise on their side, and they had learned the lessons of past failures. The Erythians, meanwhile, continued to view the humans as insignificant, dispatching only a small fleet to handle the situation. They believed the rebellion would be crushed in a matter of days. But the humans had prepared. They had learned the art of warfare from the remnants of alien technology they had scavenged, and they had perfected the art of asymmetric combat. They knew the Erythians would underestimate them, and they planned to use that to their advantage. The battle began with a skirmish in the planet's orbit, when a small fleet of human ships, constructed from salvaged technology and newly acquired Erythian designs, ambushed the incoming Erythian ships. The Erythians were shocked by the ferocity of the attack and the advanced capabilities of the human vessels. The battle was a brutal one. Human ships, agile and unpredictable, outmaneuvered the much larger and more powerful Erythian warships. The humans had no illusions of victory through sheer firepower alone. They employed guerrilla tactics, launching surprise strikes, then retreating into the atmosphere to take cover among the clouds. They used decoys, sabotage, and covert operations to target key infrastructure on the planet's surface, disrupting the Erythian war machine. For days, the battle raged, and the Erythians began to realize that they were dealing with more than just an insurgency. They were facing a force that was learning and adapting at an alarming rate. The humans' resourcefulness and ingenuity turned the tide. As the battle entered its final stages, the Erythians found themselves besieged by human forces they couldn't defeat through conventional means. In a final desperate push, the Erythians launched a full assault on the human stronghold, but the humans had one last trick up their sleeve. Using a combination of Erythian and human technology, they set a trap, a powerful electromagnetic pulse that temporarily disabled the Erythian fleet's communication systems and weapons. It was a risky move, but it paid off. The Erythian forces were thrown into disarray, unable to coordinate their attacks. In that moment of confusion, the human forces struck hard and fast, crippling the remaining Erythian warships and capturing their command center. It was a decisive victory, the first of many to come. As the Erythians retreated, humiliated, the human forces on Garros celebrated. The battle had been bloody, but it had proven something to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. Word of the victory spread like wildfire. Across the galaxy, other species began to take notice. The Xantar, the Erosians, and even the Erythians themselves began to recognize that humanity was no longer a minor player in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The tide was turning. But the victory came at a cost. The humans had lost many good men and women in the battle, and the cost of war was beginning to weigh on their hearts. The galaxy's empires would not sit idly by, they would strike back. But humanity had proven that they were not afraid to fight. And, more importantly, they had proven that they could win. The first true battle for the galaxy had been fought, and humanity had emerged victorious. But the war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The galaxy's powerful empires were now united in their resolve to crush this newfound threat. But humanity, the underdog that no one had believed in, was ready. They had proven themselves on Garros, and they would prove themselves again. And this time, the stakes were even higher. The stage was set for a new era, one where humanity would rise to become the most powerful force the galaxy had ever known. The fires of war would burn bright, but humanity's resolve would burn even brighter. The victory at Garros had rippled through the galaxy like the first tremor of an earthquake. The Erythians, known for their cold logic and methodical strategies, had been humiliated by a species they considered unworthy of their attention. Their retreat was swift and marked by anger, but it was also filled with fear. If humanity could achieve such a victory, what else were they capable of? Across the galaxy, the other major empires took notice. The Eurasians, whose reputation for dominance had been shaken, convened a council of war. The Xantar, whose war fleets had once been unmatched, now feared the rise of a species with the potential to rival them in both resourcefulness and tenacity. Even the enigmatic Erythians, though silent in their retreat, were calculating the next steps. Humanity had proven that they were no longer the weak, primitive species everyone had assumed them to be. They had proven that they could fight, win, and adapt to challenges in ways that no one could have predicted. The galaxy's rulers were not accustomed to such upstarts. They were accustomed to the weak bending the knee, to the lesser races falling into line. But humanity's victory was more than just a military success, it was a statement. Humanity was ready to assert its place among the stars. Yet, the cost of that victory weighed heavily on the human resistance. Though the battle on Garros had been won, it was clear that the galaxy's most powerful factions would not give up their dominance without a fight. The Eurasians were already massing their forces, preparing for a large-scale retaliation. The Xantar had begun to rebuild their war fleets, and the Erythians were strategizing in the shadows. All of them now understood one thing: humanity could no longer be ignored. But rather than retreat in fear, humanity rallied. A new alliance began to take shape, one not just of human colonies, but of other species who had long suffered under the weight of galactic oppression. The idea of an intergalactic rebellion, led by humanity, began to spread. Those who had once been silenced, oppressed, or ignored saw in humanity's struggle a reflection of their own desire for freedom. The underdog had become a symbol of resistance across the galaxy. The leader of this new human alliance was none other than Alara Quinn, the fierce and unwavering commander who had sparked the rebellion on Lasara. After the battle on Garros, Alara had emerged as a symbol of hope and defiance. Her victory, though hard-won, had shown the galaxy that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. But she knew that the fight was far from over. In fact, the real war had only just begun. Alara's leadership was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. She was a strategist, a diplomat, and a warrior all in one. She understood that humanity could not stand alone in this war. She needed allies, not just from Earth, but from the furthest reaches of the galaxy. With her charisma and determination, she began to form a coalition of the oppressed. From the once subjugated species of the Drakari, who had been enslaved by the Xantar, to the Sarians, a peaceful race whose world had been ravaged by Eurasian greed, Alara found those willing to rise up. Humanity's reputation as fierce fighters, adaptable in ways the galaxy's powers had never anticipated, helped unite these disparate factions. The human alliance was built on the ideals of freedom, justice, and the unshakable belief that no one species should hold dominion over another. The galaxy's empires had relied on centuries of fear and intimidation to maintain control, but they now faced a growing movement that could not be so easily silenced. The alliance began to form a fleet, drawing on the best ships and technology humanity had to offer, combined with the unique strengths of its allies. Though they were vastly outnumbered by the combined fleets of the galaxy's elite, the rebellion had something the empires did not: unity in purpose. Each ship in their growing fleet was powered by more than just advanced engines and weaponry. They were driven by an unyielding belief in the righteousness of their cause. In the shadows of the galaxy, far from the prying eyes of the ruling empires, Elara and her allies made their first bold move. They launched a series of surprise attacks on strategic supply lines, targeting planets that supplied weapons and resources to the galactic powers. The raids were swift, efficient, and devastatingly successful. The galaxy's rulers, once confident in their ability to control the flow of resources and power, were now scrambling to protect their interests. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. The Eurasians, Xantar, and Erythians combined forces to launch a full-scale counterattack. They sent fleets to crush the growing rebellion before it could gain any more traction. But they underestimated one thing: the resolve of the human alliance. The first major battle between the United Rebellion and the Galactic Empires took place on the dark side of the gas giant Tirius. It was a battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Rebellion's forces, though outnumbered, used their knowledge of the system and their enemies' tactics to devastating effect. The rebels knew how to blend into the shadows of space, using the cover of asteroid fields and the swirling atmosphere of Tirius itself to launch surprise strikes. It was a costly battle, and both sides suffered tremendous losses. But it was also a victory for the rebellion. The galactic powers had been caught off guard, and for the first time, they realized that humanity and its allies were no longer merely a nuisance. They were a force capable of taking on even the mightiest fleets. As the dust settled on Tirius, Elara Quinn stood among the survivors, looking out at the wreckage of enemy ships. It was a moment of triumph, but Elara knew the real fight was just beginning. The empires would not back down easily, but neither would the rebellion. The gathering storm was only beginning to break, and the galaxy was about to be changed forever. The rebellion was no longer just a series of isolated uprisings. It had become a united front, and humanity, once the galaxy's underdog, was ready to take its place at the heart of the galaxy's future. The Battle of Tirius marked a turning point. Though the rebellion had suffered heavy casualties, the losses suffered by the galactic empires were far more devastating. The Eurasians, Xantar, and Erythians, each once confident in their unchallenged rule, now found themselves in the midst of a conflict they hadn't prepared for. The alliance led by humanity had struck a crucial blow to their control over key systems, and they could no longer dismiss the growing rebellion as a passing threat. Across the galaxy, whispers of the rebellion's victories began to turn into open talk. The once mighty empires now had to reckon with the possibility that the tide was shifting. But while the empires regrouped and began to plan their next moves, humanity's alliance was in the midst of a new challenge, unifying its disparate factions under a common cause. Elara Quinn, having proven herself as a brilliant military leader, now faced the delicate task of forging stronger bonds between the different species in her coalition. The rebellion was a diverse group, made up of former slaves, oppressed colonies, and those who had simply grown tired of the galactic status quo. Each faction brought its own strengths to the table, but also its own set of fears and prejudices. The Sarians, for example, had always been pacifists, struggling to come to terms with the violence necessary to bring down the empires. The Dracari, a race of once powerful warriors, carried a deep-seated hatred for the Xantar, which made diplomacy with the Xantar's former victims a delicate matter. For Elara, the key was finding common ground, emphasizing their shared struggle against the tyranny of the galaxy's rulers. Every decision was made with the understanding that the unity of the rebellion would be its greatest strength. The leadership was diverse, with representatives from each faction sitting at the table with her. But it was clear that Elara's resolve and vision were the glue that held the coalition together. However, the galactic empires were not idle. In the aftermath of Tirius, they began to adapt, shifting their strategies in response to the rebellion's growing threat. The Eurasians, shaken by their defeat, now turned to their most trusted commanders, General Orloth, a brutal tactician known for his ruthlessness. The Xantar, once embarrassed by their initial underestimation of humanity, began training a new generation of warriors specifically to combat the rebellion's strategies. Meanwhile, the Erythians, whose intelligence networks were unrivaled, launched a covert operation to infiltrate the rebellion, hoping to divide and conquer from within. The galactic empires had underestimated humanity's ability to learn and adapt, but now they understood that the rebellion could not be defeated by conventional means alone. It would take innovation, intelligence, and, above all, unity. The empires had the superior firepower, but humanity had something they could not quantify, the will to fight for something greater than themselves. Meanwhile, Elara and her council knew that the time for waiting was over. The rebellion needed to take the fight directly to the heart of the galactic powers. Their next target was the core system of the Eurasian Empire, a heavily fortified region known as the Fortress Star. The Fortress Star was the center of Eurasian power, a massive starbase surrounded by a fleet capable of annihilating any force that dared to approach. It was thought to be impregnable, a symbol of Eurasian might and security. But Elara knew better. The rebellion had already demonstrated that no force was invincible, and the Fortress Star was no exception. It was not just a military target, it was a psychological one. If humanity and its allies could strike at the very heart of Eurasian power, it would send a message not just to the Eurasians, but to the entire galaxy. The planning for the assault was meticulous. The rebellion's fleet, though still smaller than the combined might of the galactic empires, had grown more efficient with each passing battle. Humanity's expertise in adapting alien technology, combined with the ingenuity of their allies, made their ships nimble and unpredictable. The Alliance leaders knew that they had to strike with precision. A direct assault would only lead to a slaughter. Elara's plan was bold and daring. Rather than launching a full-scale frontal attack, she proposed a series of decoy missions, designed to lure the Eurasian fleet away from their core defenses. The rebellion's smaller, more agile ships would create chaos, drawing the Eurasian forces out into the surrounding systems. Meanwhile, a small strike team would penetrate deep into the Fortress Star's defenses, targeting its power core. A well-placed strike could cripple the entire facility, leaving it vulnerable to a full assault. The plan was risky. The Fortress Star was surrounded by a web of deadly mines, and the Eurasian fleet was notorious for its relentless counterattacks. But Elara's leadership and the trust she had built with her allies were the driving forces behind the mission. They had come too far to back down now. As the operation began, the first phase went off without a hitch. The decoy missions worked perfectly, and the Eurasians, as anticipated, sent their forces out in pursuit. The strike team, led by Elara herself, made its way through a series of dense asteroid fields, using the cover of the system's dense radiation belts to hide their approach. The tension was palpable as the strike team approached the Fortress Star. They could see the station looming in the distance, its vast structure nearly twice the size of any other starbase the rebellion had encountered. It was a symbol of Eurasian strength, and it stood as a testament to the Empire's arrogance. As the strike team neared their target, the final countdown began. A few more minutes, and they would be in position to launch the most daring strike of the war. Every heart was pounding, every breath held. Failure was not an option. And then, at the moment of truth, the alarms blared. The Fortress Star had detected their presence. The Eurasian fleet was returning, faster than anticipated. The plan had gone awry. The final phase was about to begin, and everything would hinge on a single, split-second decision. Elara's hands tightened on the controls as she made the call that would change the course of the war. There was no turning back now. The rebellion had come to the heart of the Eurasian Empire. And it was ready to strike. The Eurasian Fortress Star loomed large in the distance, its massive form dominating the surrounding space. Elara Quinn's heart raced as the alarms blared, signaling that the enemy had detected their approach. She had anticipated some resistance, but not this. The Eurasians were returning to their base faster than they'd calculated. There was no time left to hesitate. The strike team, a mix of human soldiers and members of their alien allies, was already in position, cloaked in the cover of nearby debris fields. They had one shot at this. The core of the Eurasian Fortress Star was heavily protected, but if they could breach it and plant the sabotage charges deep inside, the station would be crippled. The rebellion could win, and the message would be clear: the galactic powers were no longer the ones in control. Elara quickly issued orders to her fleet. All ships, begin evasive maneuvers and prepare for attack. We draw their attention, now. Her voice rang with the calm authority that had become the hallmark of her leadership. The rest of the rebellion fleet, though smaller in numbers, followed her commands with precise coordination. Their ships scattered, weaving through the asteroid belt, creating false trails and using gravity wells to obscure their movements. They were outnumbered, but their tactics had been honed through years of struggle. Speed and unpredictability were their greatest weapons. As the first wave of the Eurasian fleet emerged from the nearby gas cloud, they fired immediately, targeting the decoys that the rebellion had scattered across the system. The Eurasians were eager to strike down the intruders, not realizing that they were being drawn away from their fortress, step by step. Every shot, every maneuver, was part of the calculated dance that would eventually allow the strike team to infiltrate the starbase. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Illyra's strike team, in the meantime, had already boarded the Fortress Star, sneaking aboard via a small, unmonitored docking port. Their mission was simple: sabotage the station's core systems without alerting the remaining Eurasian forces. However, as they moved deeper into the heart of the station, they encountered a chilling surprise. The Eurasians had not been caught off guard. It seemed the Eurasian High Command had suspected something. Their elite forces had been waiting. The strike team soon found themselves engaged in a deadly firefight, forced to fight through heavily armed security forces. The corridors were eerily quiet except for the sound of blaster fire and the rapid movement of boots across cold metal floors. Illyra led the charge, moving swiftly and decisively, her tactical genius guiding the team around the maze-like structure of the Fortress Star. The deeper they went, the heavier the resistance became. Eurasian soldiers, clad in dark, nearly impenetrable armor, poured in from every direction, seeking to prevent the sabotage at all costs. But the humans, aided by their allies, fought with a fury that was unlike anything the Eurasians had encountered before. The rebels moved like a well-oiled machine, clearing each hallway with precision, using everything from advanced human tech to the natural abilities of their alien allies to outmaneuver and overwhelm their enemies. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. The fate of the rebellion rested on their success. Finally, after what seemed like hours of relentless fighting, they reached the core chamber. It was a massive, high-security vault, surrounded by layers of shields, reinforced doors, and automated defense systems. The walls were lined with energy weapons, and at the center, an enormous power core hummed with an eerie glow. It was the heart of the Fortress Star, the lifeblood of the Eurasian military. Illyra's heart raced as she quickly relayed the final instructions to the team. Set the charges. We don't have much time. As they worked, the sounds of the battle outside grew louder. The Eurasians were closing in, and the countdown to detonation had begun. Just as the charges were placed and the countdown reached its final moments, the door to the chamber burst open, and Eurasian soldiers flooded in. Illyra drew her weapon and stood her ground. Hold them off. We're almost there, she shouted, her voice filled with resolve. She could see the terror in the eyes of her comrades, but they stayed focused, fighting to the last. In the ensuing chaos, Illyra took a step forward, leading the charge against the soldiers who were desperately trying to stop them. Blaster fire ricocheted off the walls, and the air was thick with the sound of weapons discharging. The Eurasians, heavily armed and well-trained, fought with the full might of their military prowess, but they were no match for the rebellion's raw determination. The rebels held their ground, pushing the Eurasian forces back, even as the charge timer continued to tick down. And then, with a sudden jolt, the power core erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion rocked the entire station, shaking it to its very foundations. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, chaos. The Eurasian Fortress Star was no longer an impenetrable symbol of Eurasian might. It was a burning husk, crippled by the rebellion's strike. The shockwave sent pieces of the station floating into space, and alarms screamed through the corridors as the station systems began to fail. The strike team barely managed to escape the blast radius, racing for the escape pods that had been primed for evacuation. Illyra Quinn was the last to board, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. The rebellion had succeeded in delivering a crushing blow to the heart of the Eurasian Empire. The shock of losing such a powerful stronghold would resonate across the galaxy, but the battle wasn't over yet. The rebellion had struck a blow, but now they had to deal with the fallout. The Eurasians would come for them, they would come with a vengeance. As the escape pod jettisoned into space, Alara's eyes scanned the distant wreckage of the fortress star. She knew they had won this battle, but she also knew that the war was far from finished. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had irrevocably altered the balance of power. But the question remained, would the rebellion's victories lead to the freedom they fought for, or would it ignite a conflict that would consume everything? The storm was far from over, and the greatest test of the rebellion was yet to come. The escape pods carried the rebellion's survivors away from the wreckage of the fortress star, but Alara Quinn couldn't bring herself to look back. She knew that the destruction of the Eurasian stronghold would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy, but the real challenge had just begun. The rebellion had delivered a blow to the heart of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, but the Eurasians would not take this defeat lying down. Their wrath would be swift and devastating. As the strike team regrouped on a distant, hidden world, they received word that the Eurasians were already mobilizing. Their retaliatory forces, vast and well-equipped, were preparing to strike back, determined to crush the rebellion before it could gain further momentum. But the rebellion had something the Eurasians didn't, the will to fight for something greater than themselves. This war wasn't just about revenge or power, it was about freedom, and it had ignited something deep within the hearts of the galaxy's oppressed. Alara gathered her council, a group made up of leaders from various species who had joined the rebellion. There was Darius, a former Eurasian scientist who had defected after witnessing the atrocities committed by his own people. Saren, a seasoned Drakari warrior whose people had suffered under the Xantar's rule for centuries. And Mira, a Sarian diplomat who had helped forge the fragile alliances between the different factions. Together, they represented the strength of the rebellion, a coalition born from the ashes of oppression. "We have no time to rest," Alara said, her voice as steady as ever. "The Eurasians will come for us, but this is our moment. The galaxy is watching, and the other empires are waiting to see how we respond. We can't afford to lose their faith. We have to press the advantage." The rebellion had struck the heart of Eurasian power, but now they had to shift the balance. They needed to ensure that the galaxy's oppressed would continue to rally to their cause. Humanity had led the charge, but they could not carry the burden alone. It was time to expand the war, to make it a true galactic struggle. The Eurasians might have the largest fleets, but they had proven that they were vulnerable. The rebellion had the element of surprise, and the resolve of countless civilizations behind them. For weeks, Alara and her council worked tirelessly, forging new alliances and preparing their forces. The human fleet, though still outnumbered, had grown stronger with each passing victory. The Sarians, who had once been reluctant to join the fight, were now committed. The Drakari, emboldened by their victories alongside humanity, prepared for more direct combat. And the Xantar, too, had begun to take notice, though they remained wary of the growing human influence. But the galaxy's ruling empires were not idle. As the rebellion spread, the Eurasians sent word to their allies, the Xantar, the Erythians, and the other galactic powers. They would form a coalition of their own, and together they would eliminate the growing threat once and for all. But as the Eurasians and their allies prepared for their final assault, Alara knew that the rebellion had reached a point of no return. The stakes were higher than ever, and the future of the galaxy would be decided in the coming battles. Humanity had risen from the ashes of oppression, and now they had to prove that they were not just fighters, but leaders. The rebellion was no longer a group of insurgents. It was a movement, a force of nature, ready to reshape the galaxy. The decisive battle came on the planet Tauren, a once neutral world that had now become the staging ground for the rebellion's final push. The Eurasian and Xantar fleets, vast and terrifying, hovered above the planet's surface, preparing for an all-out assault. The rebellion's forces were nowhere near as numerous, but they had something their enemies lacked: unity. Alara stood before her fleet, watching as ships and soldiers prepared for the final battle. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she was resolute. this was the moment they had all been fighting for. It wasn't just about humanity's survival, it was about the survival of every species that had ever been oppressed by the galactic empires. It was about the freedom to chart their own futures, free from the shackles of tyrannical rulers. As the battle raged, the rebellion's forces fought with every ounce of strength they had. The Eurasian and Xantar fleets were massive, but the rebellion was quick and relentless. They used every tactic at their disposal: hit-and-run raids, deception, and guerrilla warfare. The Eurasians were overwhelmed by the sheer unpredictability of the rebellion's strategy. Every time they thought they had cornered the enemy, the rebels slipped away, striking again where they least expected it. It was a battle unlike any other in galactic history. The galaxy's most powerful fleets clashed with a determined rebellion led by humans and their allies. The stakes could not have been higher. Illyra's flagship, the Freedom's Dawn, took a direct hit from a Eurasian battleship. The ship rocked violently, alarms blaring as sections of the hull were breached. Illyra barely steadied herself as the ship shuddered from the impact. But she knew there was no turning back. With a grim resolve, she gave the order to push forward, to take the fight directly to the heart of the Eurasian command. In a final, desperate bid to end the battle, Illyra and her strike team led a direct assault on the Eurasian flagship, Indomitable. They fought their way through the flagship's corridors, knowing that if they could cripple the command center, the rest of the Eurasian fleet would be thrown into chaos. It was a suicide mission, but Illyra had never hesitated in the face of danger. In the heart of the flagship, as explosions echoed around them, Illyra faced the Eurasian High Command. Her blade clashed with that of General Orloth, the ruthless tactician who had orchestrated the downfall of so many rebellions. But Illyra's strength, fueled by the passion and unity of the rebellion, was greater. With a final, decisive blow, she struck down Orloth, taking out the heart of the Eurasian military command. With Orloth's death, the Eurasian fleet was thrown into disarray. The rebellion's forces capitalized on the opportunity, launching a full-scale offensive that forced the remaining Eurasian ships to retreat. It was a victory, a true victory, not just for humanity, but for every species that had ever suffered under the weight of galactic oppression. The war was not yet over, but the rebellion had won a decisive victory. The galaxy had witnessed the rise of the Underdogs, of humanity's indomitable spirit and relentless will to fight for a future free from tyranny. The Eurasians and their allies would no longer dominate the galaxy. Humanity had risen, not just as a powerful military force, but as a symbol of resistance, unity, and hope. And the galaxy would never be the same again.